While I was deeply ill in a medical care bed, with severe health complications, my parents burst into my room. Mom threw papers on my lap and demanded that I hand over my $250,000 life savings to my brother. I said, "No, this is my recovery fund." My mother flew into a rage, ripped the medical device off the wall, and flung it straight at my head. I pressed the emergency button, and moments later, the morning my mother tried to kill me, I was already dying. That's not an exaggeration. That's not a dramatic way to open a story. It is the exact clinical truth. Both of my kidneys had shut down 6 days earlier. I was 31 years old. I weighed 94 pounds. I hadn't eaten solid food in 3 weeks, and a dialysis machine was doing the work my body had forgotten how to do. My blood pressure was so unstable that the nurses checked it every 40 minutes. The head nephrologist, Dr. Renata Bosch, had told me quietly on a Wednesday morning, with the tone of someone who has delivered this kind of news 100 times and never gotten comfortable with it, that without a successful transplant within the next few months, we were talking about the kind of conversation nobody wants to have. I had $250,000 in a savings account. It had taken me 9 years to save that money. I was a software engineer at a mid-sized firm in Portland, Oregon. I lived below my means because I was careful, because I had watched my family spend money they didn't have my entire childhood, and because something in me, some quiet, stubborn instinct, had always whispered that one day I would need that money more than anything else in the world. That day had come. The $250,000 was earmarked entirely for my treatment, for the transplant evaluation, the surgery costs, the anti-rejection medications I would need for the rest of my life, thousands of dollars a month, every month, forever. My health insurance had a coverage ceiling that my case had already cracked through. Without that money, I was not getting better. That was not a possibility. That was math. My parents knew all of this. They had been sitting in my hospital room for 6 days. My mother, Diane, had cried at my bedside the first night. My father, Gerald, had held my hand and told me everything was going to be fine. They had spoken to Dr. Bosch. They had seen the numbers. They had watched the dialysis machine hum and click for hours. And then, on a Thursday morning at 9:14 a.m., my mother walked through the door holding a stack of papers, and my father walked in behind her and closed the door, and something in the air of that room changed in a way I still cannot fully describe. It was like a temperature drop, like something that had been pretending to be warm finally stopped pretending. My mother set the papers on my lap without a word. I looked down. They were transfer documents, bank transfer authorization forms, already filled out with my account number which I had never given her, and a receiving account I didn't recognize. The transfer amount was written in the box at the top of the first page, $250,000. I looked up at her. "Sign them," she said. "I want a backup, because for this to make any sense, you need to understand something about my family that I spent most of my life working very hard not to understand. My brother Caleb is 3 years older than me. He is, and I say this not with bitterness, but with the exhausted clarity that comes from decades of watching someone make the same choices. A person who has never once, not a single time in his adult life, taken responsibility for a consequence he created. He has started 4 businesses. Every single one collapsed within 2 years. And in every single case, the explanation involved someone else, a partner who sabotaged him, a market that turned unfairly, an investor who pulled out at the wrong moment. Caleb, he has borrowed money from our parents so many times that I stopped counting when I was in college. He borrowed money from me twice, once $8,000 when I was 24, which he never repaid, and once $3,500 when I was 27, which he also never repaid. When I stopped lending him money after the second time, he told our mother I had abandoned the family. Our mother believed him. This is the other thing you need to understand. My mother loves Caleb with a specific kind of love that has no room in it for fairness. I recognized it when I was about 11 years old and never fully recovered from recognizing it. It was not that she didn't love me. I think she did, in her way, but Caleb was the one who needed her, and needing her was the thing she valued most in a child. I had made the mistake of being competent, of not needing rescuing, of building a life that didn't require her constant intervention, which she had read for 30 years as evidence that I didn't love her as much as Caleb did. I had tried to explain this to a therapist once. The therapist said, very gently, "It sounds like you've spent a long time being punished for being okay." That was probably the most accurate sentence anyone has ever spoken about my childhood. So when my mother put those papers on my lap and said, "Sign them," I understood, on a level below language, exactly what was happening. Caleb had found himself in trouble again. I didn't know the details yet. I would learn them later, but the structure was familiar. Caleb needed money. My mother had decided the money should come from me. The fact that the money was the only thing standing between me and a death sentence was a variable she had decided to treat as negotiable. "What is this for?" I said. My voice was very calm. I have since been told this was shock, but at the time it simply felt like clarity. "Caleb is losing the house." My mother said. "He and Stephanie and the kids are going to be on the street by the end of the month. We need to help him." "I'm on dialysis." I said. "You have savings," she said. "You've always been responsible. You can figure something out." I looked at my father, Gerald, the man who had held my hand 2 days ago and told me everything was going to be fine. He was looking at the window. "Dad," I said. He didn't answer. "This money is my treatment fund," I said, looking back at my mother. "Dr. Bosch explained this to both of you. Without this money, I cannot afford the transplant process. I cannot afford the medications afterward. This money is the reason I am going to be alive in 2 years." My mother's face did something complicated. "You're being dramatic," she said. "Insurance covers medical costs." My coverage ceiling was $180,000. I hit it 4 days ago. We talked about this. Dr. Bosch talked about this. "There are programs," she said. "Government programs. You can apply." "Mom, sign the papers, Nora." "No," I said. "This is my treatment money. I'm not signing anything." What happened in the next 30 seconds? I have replayed it thousands of times. I have described it to a detective, to a prosecutor, to a judge, to 3 separate therapists, and to my own attorney. The sequence is always the same because it happened, and it cannot be unhappened. My mother's face went from complicated to something I had never seen on a human face directed at me. It was not anger exactly. It was the expression of someone who had constructed a version of reality in which they were completely justified, and who had just encountered an obstacle they had not prepared for. She reached up. The blood pressure monitor was mounted on a rolling arm beside my bed, a sturdy piece of medical equipment about the size and weight of a large hardcover book. She grabbed it with both hands, and she ripped it off the arm. The suction cup attachment made a sound when it separated from the mount, a kind of hollow pop, and she swung it at my head. I did not have time to move. I was connected to 3 separate lines. I was 31 years old and weighed 94 pounds, and I had not stood up from that bed unassisted in 5 days. The monitor hit the left side of my head, just above my ear. I pressed the emergency button. I pressed it once, hard, and I held my thumb there, and I did not let go. The door opened in 11 seconds. I know this because there was a clock on the wall, and I was staring at it because it was the only thing in the room that wasn't my mother. The nurse who came in first was named Priya. She was 28 years old. She had long dark hair pulled back, and she had been my primary nurse for 4 days, and she knew my case better than almost anyone. She came through that door moving fast because that's what you do when an emergency button goes off on a patient who is on dialysis with unstable blood pressure. And she stopped when she saw my mother standing next to my bed, holding a blood pressure monitor, and she saw the mark on the side of my head, and her face did the thing that faces do when they are processing something that should not be happening. "What happened?" she said. "She hit me," I said, "with the monitor. Please don't let her leave." My mother said, "She's confused. She hit herself. She's on a lot of medication." Priya looked at the monitor in my mother's hands. She looked at the disconnected arm mount. She looked at me. She pressed her own call button on the wall panel. "I need security on 4 North, she said, "and I need someone to get Dr. Bosch." My father had not moved from his position by the window. He was still looking outside. I remember thinking, with a kind of distant wonder, that he was going to stand there and let this happen, that he had probably known when they walked in with those papers that something like this was possible, and he had come anyway, and he was going to stand there and let it. That was the moment I stopped having a father. Not legally, not on paper, in every way that actually matters. Security arrived 90 seconds after Priya called. 2 men, both large, both professional, both clearly trained for situations that should not be happening on a hospital floor. My mother tried to explain, calmly at first, then less calmly, that I had been confused, that I had done it to myself, that she was my mother and she had every right to be in that room. One of the security officers asked her to step out into the hallway. She refused. He asked again. She refused again and grabbed the railing of my bed and said she was not going anywhere. They removed her. It took both of them. And it was not graceful. My father walked out on his own. He didn't look at me. Dr. Bosch arrived 4 minutes after that. She examined my head. There was a contusion, a raised welt that would turn spectacular colors over the following week. And she ordered a CT scan to rule out anything worse. She sat on the edge of my bed, which she had never done before. And she asked me very quietly what had happened, and I told her. She listened to all of it. The papers, the account number they had somehow obtained, the $250,000, what my mother had said, what she had done. When I finished, Dr. Bosch was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm going to make 2 calls, one to the hospital's patient advocacy office and one to the police. Is that all right with you? Yes, I said. Good, she said. And she stood up and she smoothed her coat and she left to make those calls. And I lay in that bed with a contusion on the side of my head and a dialysis machine humming beside me. And I thought, this is the day everything changes. I didn't know yet how completely I was right. The police arrived within the hour, 2 officers, then a detective named Marcus Webb, who had a quiet, methodical way of asking questions that made you feel somehow like he had already decided to take you seriously and was just filling in the gaps. He sat in the chair next to my bed with a small notebook, and he asked me to walk him through everything. And I did. He asked about the bank account number on the forms. I told him I had never given that number to my parents. He asked if I had any idea how they might have obtained it. I said I didn't know, but I had a guess. 3 months earlier, before I got sick, I had visited my parents for Thanksgiving. I had briefly and stupidly logged into my banking app on my childhood home's Wi-Fi. I hadn't thought about it since. I mentioned this to Detective Webb. He wrote it down. He asked if I wanted to file a report. I said yes. He asked if I understood that this could result in criminal charges against my mother. I said yes. He asked one more time, gently, in the way that people ask when they want to make sure you've thought about something, whether I was certain. I said, she hit me with a medical device while I was on dialysis. Yes, I am certain. He filed the report. My mother was escorted out of the hospital that afternoon and told she was not permitted to return. A restraining order was in place within 48 hours, applied for by the hospital on my behalf while I was physically unable to leave my bed to do it myself. The charges that followed, assault causing bodily harm, attempted theft by coercion, unauthorized access of financial account information, took several months to fully materialize because that is how the legal system works. But they materialized. What I didn't know yet, what Detective Webb would tell me 6 weeks later, after the investigation had gone somewhere none of us expected, was that my parents' visit that morning had not been a spontaneous decision made in desperation. It had been planned. Caleb had known about my diagnosis for 4 weeks before my parents walked into that hospital room. I found this out from my cousin Renee, who is the one honest person in my extended family, and who called me 3 weeks after I was discharged with a voice that sounded like someone who had been carrying something heavy for too long and finally needed to put it down. I need to tell you something, Renee said, and I need you to know I didn't know what they were planning to do. I thought they were just going to talk to you. She told me that Caleb had called a family meeting, not including me, 6 weeks before the hospital incident. He was losing the house in Scottsdale, Arizona. He owed $218,000 on a mortgage he could no longer service, plus $34,000 to a private investor who had backed his most recent business venture, plus various smaller debts that Renee described as the kind of numbers that add up when you stop paying attention. He needed money. He knew I had money. He knew I was sick. He had presented it to the family as, Nora has enough. She can get government assistance. We take care of our own. My mother had agreed immediately. My father had raised one objection, which was that I might not agree to sign the transfer voluntarily. And Caleb had said, Renee told me this part slowly, like she was making sure she got the words right. Mom will handle it. Nora has always listened to Mom when she pushes hard enough. I sat with that sentence for a long time after I got off the phone with Renee. The casualness of it, the confidence, the complete and total belief that if their mother applied enough pressure, I would comply, that I was at 31 years old and fighting for my life, still that 11-year-old girl who could be managed. Renee also told me one more thing. The bank account number on those transfer documents, it had not come from my Thanksgiving visit after all. It had come from Caleb, 3 years earlier, when I'd lent him the $3,500, the loan he never repaid. I had transferred the money directly from my account. He had saved my account number. He had held on to it for 3 years. And when the moment came, he handed it to my mother and let her walk into my hospital room with it. I called Detective Webb the same afternoon. He was not surprised. He said the investigation had been moving in that direction for a while. He said, this changes the charges. Here is what I learned about my own body while all of this was happening, because my body was not waiting for the legal system to catch up. I was deteriorating. The transplant timeline that Dr. Bosch had outlined depended on my remaining stable enough to survive the surgery. Stability, in my case, was not a given. My blood pressure remained unpredictable. My weight had dropped to 91 pounds by the time I was discharged to an outpatient dialysis facility. I was going 3 times a week, 4 hours each session, and I was exhausted in a way that I cannot describe to someone who has not experienced organ failure. It is not like being tired. It is like being wrung out at a cellular level, like your body is conserving every resource it has for the minimum work of staying alive, and there is nothing left over for anything else. I had one friend who showed up consistently during this time. Her name is Vera, and she is the kind of person who does not ask what you need, but simply figures it out and does it. She drove me to dialysis. She sat in the waiting room for 4 hours, 3 times a week, reading or working on her laptop. She stocked my apartment with food I could actually eat given my dietary restrictions, and left post-it notes on the containers explaining what was in each one. She coordinated with my employer so that my medical leave was properly documented and my health insurance, what remained of it, stayed active. She also, without telling me she was doing it, started a fundraising page. I found out about it 6 weeks after it went up, when Vera sat across from me at my kitchen table one afternoon and slid her laptop across and said quietly, "You should look at this." The page had raised $127,000. I stared at that number for a long time. People want to help you, Vera said. You just have to let them. I had not cried in front of anyone since my diagnosis. I cried then. I cried for a while. And Vera sat across the table and let me, which is exactly the right thing to do, and which requires a kind of steadiness that not everyone has. The transplant evaluation was completed in month 4. I was listed as a candidate. My blood type, O positive, meant a longer wait for a deceased donor. But the transplant team was also actively searching for living donors, and the evaluation of potential matches among people I knew had begun. Vera was evaluated. She was not a match. Renee, my honest cousin, asked to be evaluated. She was a partial match, which the team said was worth exploring further. And then, in month 5, something happened that I still think about almost every day. I received a letter. It was addressed to me at the dialysis facility, forwarded from my apartment. The return address was a law firm in Phoenix, Arizona. I opened it sitting in my dialysis chair with one arm connected to a machine and the other hand holding an envelope, and I read it twice before I understood what it was saying. My maternal grandmother, my mother's mother, a woman named Eleanor who had died 14 months earlier and with whom I had been very close, had left me a specific bequest in her will. I had not been told about this. My mother was the executor of Eleanor's estate. She had processed the will. She had distributed the assets. She had not told me about my bequest. The bequest was $90,000. The letter was from a junior attorney at the firm who had been handling a dispute related to the estate, unrelated to me, and who had discovered, in reviewing the file, that a specific bequest to one Nora Callahan had never been paid out, and who had tracked me down to notify me. I sat in that dialysis chair, and I read the letter a third time. My mother had known, for 14 months, that Eleanor had left me $90,000. She had never told me. She had been executor of the estate. She had had full access and full authority, and she had done nothing, said nothing, and 14 months later had walked into my hospital room with transfer documents trying to take $250,000 from me. Vera and I have dinner every Thursday. This has been true for 2 years now. She drinks wine. I drink sparkling water with lemon. She tells me about her week and I tell her about mine. And neither of us has to explain anything to the other, which is the specific comfort of a friendship that has been through something real. Renee and I talk every couple of weeks. She had a full recovery from the donation surgery, and her follow-up labs have been consistently good. She says it doesn't feel like sacrifice, that she made a decision and the decision was right. And that's all it is. I have told her more than once that I don't know how to account for what she did. And she always says the same thing. We're family, the real kind. I have a follow-up appointment with Dr. Bosch every 6 months. My last lab panel was the best it has ever been. She told me, in that same quiet, measured way she tells people things, that I was doing remarkably well. I asked her what that meant in terms I could use. She said, "It means keep doing what you're doing." I intend to. I think about my grandmother, Eleanor, sometimes. I think about the fact that she chose to leave me that $90,000, that she had seen something in me or had wanted to do something for me, or had simply understood in the way grandmothers sometimes understand things that are not said aloud in families, that I might need it one day. I think about the 14 months it sat in an estate file while my mother decided not to mention it. I think about the fact that the letter found me in a dialysis chair in November when I needed it most because a junior attorney doing routine file review happened to notice a name on a document. Eleanor had a saying she used to repeat when I was a child, and she was teaching me to play cards. She would say, "The hand you're dealt isn't the game. The game is what you do with it." I am 33 years old. I have one working kidney and a scar from a 7.5-hour surgery, and a blood pressure that requires monitoring and anti-rejection medications I will take every morning for the rest of my life. I have a savings account I rebuilt slowly, carefully, the same way I built the first one. I have Vera and Renee and Dr. Bosch and Patricia Osei, and a colleague named James who started leaving coffee on my desk the week I came back to work and has never once asked for an explanation. I pressed that emergency button with my thumb and I held it, and I did not let go. That is the whole story, really. Everything else is just what happened because I held on.